From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Thanks for listening in. First up today, information that was passed along at K-State's Row Crop Field Day at Hayes yesterday, where Augustine Obour reported on his current research on occasional tillage in a no-till cropping system as a remedy for herbicide-resistant weed issues. Also today, K-State's Peter Tomlinson will tell us about a new publication from K-State that'll help you producers navigate the vast array of land management water quality regulations in the state and the agencies that administer those. Later on this week's K-State Horticulture segment, Dennis Patton will talk about what's necessary to successfully start a fall garden of cool season vegetables. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
Man, it's hot out here. Heat stress affects more than just humans. It also affects livestock. Extreme heat, humidity, wind speeds, and cloud cover all make a difference in air temperature. To control problems, make sure your livestock have shade and water provided at all times. This will help prevent problems in breeding, meat production, and reduce chances of death. Please take all these into consideration for livestock production. Brought to you by K-State Animal Science Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome to this Thursday edition of Agriculture Today from Kansas State University. Well, the practice of no-till is well ingrained in Kansas crop production. Farmers in this state have taken up no-till enthusiastically over the past 30 years or so, and no-till systems have served producers quite well, promoting soil and water conservation, fuel cost savings, soil quality improvement, and so forth. Weed control has been successfully accomplished, for the most part, with herbicide treatments. However, a number of weed populations have, as you know, developed resistance to herbicides, and that has put a chink in the no-till armor. So, in a situation where herbicide resistance has become more than just a nuisance for a no-till producer, what would happen if occasional tillage would be employed, as needed, on a one-time basis? That's what a K-State soil scientist at the university's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes has been checking out in his latest research. Augustine Obour demonstrated his project and the findings to date at the center's 2017 Row Crop Roundup Field Day yesterday. And Augustine shared this alongside his test plots at Hayes, featuring a wheat sorghum fallow no-till system.
So what I'm working on here is to look at tillage, occasional tillage in long-term no-till plots that has been in no-till for over 40 years. And you can see there's glyphosate-resistant kochia all over. And then we also, one other major issue is windmill grass. It's a perennial grass that we can control. We sprayed it, but we can kill it. And then you see the glyphosate-resistant weeds, we cannot also kill those. We're still seeing them. So one thing that we're looking at is, can we use occasional tillage in this long-term no-till to control these weed issues that we have. The other thing also is to look at if we can use this occasional tillage to also help to redistribute soil nutrients in this long-term plot, because we see nutrient stratification in these plots. So we tilled this plot using a sweep plow. So we came in and then we tilled it up to 15 centimeters to help us redistribute some of the nutrients, but also to control the windmill grass and the glyphosate-resistant weeds.
So in this field test, concerning at least one of these weed issues, the one-time tillage pass with a sweep did indeed take care of that particular weed pressure.
So this is the windmill grass that we till. So we took it from the roots, and you see this is dead, completely dead. So hopefully we'll be able to, with this tillage operation, we're able to control this grass and it won't come in to the plots maybe for some time. So we can get by with this one-time tillage operation, and then we plant our crops into it. Compared to this, where we have all this, the grass is still there, and that is going to reduce our wheat yields.
So again, this tillage was implemented just ahead of the wheat part of that wheat-sorghum fallow rotation. And in this first go-round, Augustine reports that the resulting impact on the yield of that wheat was favorable.
So we started this last year, that we tilled this plots and then we planted into wheat. And our data shows that this one-time tillage operation actually did not affect our winter wheat yields. The yields that we harvested from the wheat plot this year in the tillage plots were statistically the same as the long-term no-till, and in some cases, the yields were slightly higher than the long-term no-till plots. We got about 4 bushels per acre greater from our occasional till plots compared to our long-term tillage plots.
And he notes there was an additional benefit to that singular tillage.
One other thing is, if you look at where we till, we break the soil, and it's very easy to plant into this long-term no-till that has been tilled compared to where we have this grass issue. So when we come back to plant, see the soil surface, at some point we'll be able to get some of this resistant weeds control. But when we come back to plant, sometimes when it hasn't rained for a long time, it's very difficult to plant into the no-till plot. But it's easier to plant into where we have till, and that helps with the weed germination. We get a better stand from where we have till compared to the low-till plots that are hard on the soil surface. So where we place the seed is very hard at that time of planting, but if we had some rain, then it's easier planting into that sorghum stubble.
And when considering this practice, it is important, says Augustine, to remember that they're using a much less aggressive tillage tool this one time within the system.
When we talk about tillage, we are using sweet plows. We are not using a mobile plow. We are not disking it, but we are using a sweet plow to till the plows. So we are not actually damaging the soil structure compared to so this is kind of a reduced kind of tillage compared to where you disc and plow.
Nor is this idea built around the thought of a one-time tillage every production season. The intention here, says Augustine, is one time and one time only.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that you can't overemphasize. This is one-time tillage. It's not like you till this year, it's not continuous tillage. So we are using this as a strategy, so strategic tillage, to control these weed issues. It's not something that we will continue to do. So hopefully we are not going to do this again for the next 10 to 20 years. So this kind of one-time tillage, and then at this time, the late summer that we till, hopefully we are there's enough moisture at the time of tilling. So you see that it's well uniform that we can easily plant into. So you want to till at a time where the soil moisture condition is right, so you don't have clogs in your field.
Once again, this work is in its early stages. Augustine will be looking into this prospect over multiple years' time.
We're doing this, we have a wheat sorghum fallow rotation, so we'll plant this into wheat, and then we'll harvest it next year, 2018. Then 2019, we will plant the fields into sorghum. So we are going to monitor the effects of this tillage on wheat yields and also on the following sorghum crop yield too. And then we also be monitoring soil water content, and then soil quality like soil organic carbon, potential mineralizable nitrogen, and water stable aggregates in these fields over the next couple of years to see if we are seeing any changes in soil quality, and if we tend to decrease soil quality, how long does it take to build in the soil carbon content up to where we had it before we till it. But with this shallow tillage, I don't think we are going to see that much difference in soil organic carbon between that and where we have as no-till.
But he says that he does have an early read on the effect on the capacity of that soil to retain moisture following the singular tillage.
Preliminary conclusion is that when we tilled these fields last year and we measured soil water content, there was no difference between soil water content from what we did, the occasional, the one-time tillage versus the long-term no-till, the water content was the same. And then our wheat yields were a little bit higher where we did the one-time tillage compared to the long-term no-till. So our preliminary conclusion is that we are not seeing any significant negative effect in terms of soil water content or the wheat yields following this one-time tillage operation. And one thing I want to mention again is this is not disc. We didn't disc it. We just used a sweep plow to do this.
And there are further observations to be made on the resulting soil quality from this approach.
We are also going to look at soil measurements. What are the effects of this tillage on soil structure and soil microbial community structure? So we're going to take soil samples. We take it 1 month after we till the plots, and then 12 months after tillage, then we do the soil sampling and look at these changes in soil quality.
So this work will continue. Augustine is quick to point out, though, that he remains a huge proponent of no-till cropping.
I still prefer no-till to tillage, but if you get to the situation where you have significant grass, perennial grass issues that you can't control, then having a tillage operation to control that may be a way to go.
That's K-State soil scientist Augustine Obour discussing his research into the impact of occasional tillage in a no-till cropping system to contend with herbicide-resistant weeds. Augustine presented this work at the Row Crop Roundup Field Day hosted yesterday by K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes. On tomorrow's broadcast, we'll have more information for you from that field day, with a look at research going on at Hayes on grain sorghum resistance to sugarcane aphid. We'll feature K-State crop entomologist J.P. Michaud and his comments presented at the field day. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we'll return after this brief moment aside here on the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today returns now, and you producers are well aware that when you have to deal with regulations that might apply to your operations, there is quite a labyrinth of information you have to work through to know where to go to assure your activities are in compliance with regulations. And there's a publication out of K-State Research and Extension that can lend a hand to that effect. And we want to cover that now with our guest who spent quite a bit of time revising the previous edition of this. Peter Tomlinson is with us. He's a Research and Extension Environmental Quality Specialist in the Agronomy Department here at K-State. This is entitled, Peter, Environmental Regulation Guide for Rural Kansas. If you would, what this is for, its intent.
The intent of this publication is to provide our agricultural operations with a summary of the different regulations from a variety of different perspectives that may come into play in their operation, and to provide them direction in finding out what is the point of contact if they have questions. So this includes both regulations at the state level as well as federal regulations. And it can take somebody quite a bit of time to figure out who is the right person to contact. And so this was a publication that was originally put together about 10 years ago. It was out of date, and so myself and Dr. Alexei Sheshikov in our Bio and Ag Engineering Department with others worked to revise this publication and really provide a single document that at least is a starting point for a producer to find a contact. And so we've broken the document into kind of 5 key areas. We've got a section that relates to agricultural chemicals. We've got a broad section that deals with regulations around air, land, and water. Another section that deals with livestock, fish, and wildlife, recognizing that we've got oil and gas development as well as water wells. We have a section that deals with that. They've got some specific regulations in there. And then finally, waste management, which really covers the broad spectrum of issues that a producer may be trying to find resources and contacts related to different regulations. So, not to go through all of these, but if we look at the agricultural chemicals section, and this is one I've had some questions on, above ground storage tanks. What does a producer need to do? Who is in charge of those? And there's a couple of different entities that have responsibilities. At the state level, it's the local fire marshal and the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, along with and within the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, it's the Bureau of Environmental Remediation storage tank section. And so, they deal with a component of it. Additionally, depending on how much storage you have, it may fall under some EPA jurisdiction. And so this document gives just a real brief summary that kind of highlights we've called the critical concern requirements or what might trigger an agency having jurisdiction.
So it really pins it down and gets into the nitty-gritty here. Whatever the situation might be regarding, in this case, above-ground storage tanks, and it really covers the waterfront here, does it not? It
does. And then, we go further. We've provided the contact for the agency. We've tried to highlight if there's a specific regulation that the producer needs to be aware of. If we look at chemigation, applying pesticides and fertilizers or effluent through your irrigation system, that's something that a producer needs to work with the Kansas Department of Agriculture and make sure that they have the appropriate permits in place before they do that activity. And so, this document goes through all that level of detail and really tries to direct an operator to that point of contact.
And the contact information is thorough as well. You've phone numbers, you've email addresses, websites, the whole thing, right?
Yes.
So it's very easy to track. And as you said, Peter, there are 5 categories here. We'd repeat those: agricultural chemicals, air, land, and water management, livestock, fish, and wildlife management, oil, gas, water wells, storage and transportation, and waste management. There's really a comprehensive tone to this. It's a brief and condensed publication, but it covers so much.
Right. I mean, we're not getting into the fine details of the regulation, but we're trying to provide a synopsis of that and then really direct somebody to the agency that they need to contact that can quickly answer their questions.
It's a handy cross-reference. It lists to point out the activity or situation you might be in, the required action, the agency with regulatory responsibility, again, the contact information, and those critical concerns or requirements that might apply to that activity in general. But again, there may be more details to flesh out there when you talk with that contact. Right. Toward the tail end of this publication, Peter, you also have listed some additional informational resources to lend still more guidance and opportunity for producers to learn more about what regulations are in effect out there.
We have, again, kind of following the format of the publication, we've provided a list of different publications or different sources of information that we came across in developing this document that we felt were of importance to producers. We've also highlighted a number of extension publications within the K-State system that may come into play or provide additional resources for a landowner across the state.
And that's quite an array of resources, and it's right there handy in the same publication as we talk about it. So where is this available to producers or anybody else who would be interested, Peter?
It is available. It's available through the K-State Extension Bookstore. This is an online publication in our print-on-demand format, or if you don't have access that way, I'd be happy to send a producer a print copy.
Excellent. So you can contact Peter at the address we'll give you in just a few moments here. But just to re-stress the importance of this kind of reference, Peter, because there's such a mountain of regulatory information out there, and you're in contact with producers regularly about these. So that's somewhat prompting this initiative, isn't it?
It is. Whether we're dealing with a confined livestock feeding operation or, a producer that's looking at applying, municipal biosolids or drinking water residuals as a liming agent, all of those materials or operations have some regulatory requirements. And so, trying to make sure that we're directing and, our producers are able to find out who they need to be in contact with to, make sure that they're within the letter of the law.
And do want to mention, you mentioned the law. One more thing, an important disclaimer. This is for informative purposes only, not for legal reference, right?
Correct. We have done our best to make an interpretation, but at the end of the day, you do need to go to the specific statute and be in compliance as it's stated in statute.
Very good. It's extraordinarily easy to use, this guide, and again, you can find it through the bookstore at ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore, among other locations. And Peter, if folks would drop you an email, you'll send it to them likewise, correct?
I would be happy to.
And that address is?
ptomlin@ksu.edu.
That's ptomlin@ksu.edu. Knowing that it took more than a little groundwork to pull this together, Peter, congratulations to you, to Alexi, to Carrie Ebert of our staff here at K-State as well, and others for assembling this information and allowing producers to have a clear path to information on meeting with environmental regulations and the like as they might operate their land. Appreciate your time right here.
Thank you very much. Glad to be with you today.
Once again, Peter Tomlinson is an Extension Environmental Quality Specialist in K-State's Department of Agronomy. What you're looking for is entitled Environmental Regulation Guide for Rural Kansas. It has just been revised and updated, and it can give you what information you need to know to get your questions answered on some activity that you might be conducting on your property and whether there are regulatory considerations to be brought to the fore there. Check that out through ksre.ksu.edu or email again Peter at ptomlin@ksu.edu. You are tuned in to Agriculture Today. We'll stand aside now and return after this break with today's agricultural news headlines, as well as this week's Kansas Soybean Update with Greg Akagi. That's awaiting, along with our weekly K-State Horticulture segment coming up, where we'll talk up the idea of planting a fall vegetable garden in the weeks ahead. All that right here on the K-State Radio Network. Please stay with us.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson here. And for you now, today's agricultural news headlines in brief, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, Bloomberg reports that Cargill Incorporated has joined Bill Gates and other businesses to invest in a technology to make meat from self-producing animal cells. This amid rising consumer demand for protein that's less reliant on feed, land, and water. Memphis Meats, which produces beef, chicken, and duck directly from animal cells without raising and slaughtering livestock or poultry, raised $17 million from investors, including Cargill, Gates, and billionaire Richard Branson. The fundraising round was led by venture capital firm DFJ, which has previously backed several social-minded retail startups. The co-founder and CEO of Memphis Meats, Uma Valetti, said in a statement the way conventional meat is produced today creates challenges for the environment, animal welfare, and human health. Her words were that these are problems that everyone wants to solve. To date, Memphis Meats has raised $22 million. Cargill has taken an equity position in Memphis Meats' first series of funding, according to the president of Growth Ventures at Cargill Protein, Sonia Roberts. She did not disclose the investment amount. Now, Tyson Foods, the largest U.S. meat producer, has created a venture capital fund focusing on investing in companies to sustainably feed the world's growing population. Back in December, Tyson announced a stake in plant-based protein producer Beyond Meat, which counts Gates among its early funders. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer said that President Trump wants to see substantial improvements to the U.S.-South Korea Free Trade Agreement. However, South Korea has made it clear it will not agree to any changes until it investigates the cause of any trade imbalance. That's a process that could take months to unfold. South Korea officials repeated the country wants to begin a joint study to investigate potential causes of the trade gap and evaluate the overall impact of the agreement. U.S. officials made no response to the South Korean request. The U.S. overall trade deficit with South Korea is around $28 billion. That number has more than doubled since 2011, the last full year before the deal went into effect, when it stood at $13 billion. At the close of the meeting yesterday, the two sides had reached no agreement on possible revisions to the deal. Lighthizer attended that meeting and said that, unfortunately, in his words, too many American workers have not benefited from that agreement. The two countries are expected to continue discussions in the coming weeks. And the pace of regulatory activity was down in the first 6 months of the Trump administration. That was welcome relief to businesses that contend they've been burdened by rules from the prior administration. In total, 67 regulatory actions were processed in the first 6 months of this administration, according to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, which reviews all significant federal regulations. Those actions include notices, proposals, and final rules, and they compare to the 216 actions recorded by the same point in the Obama administration. That's according to government data. The 2017 Ag Census will take place at the end of the year. If you're thinking of filing that information online, there is a demonstration on the website that you can try out right now, as we hear from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
The USDA Secretary wants to highlight something that happens only once every 5 years.
Hi, I'm Sonny Perdue. As a former farmer and ag businessman, I know the value of the Census of Agriculture. It helps us to tell the story of U.S. agriculture and to make the right policies to help rural America succeed.
The Census of Agriculture is the only source of comprehensive data down to the county level that shows the change in structure of U.S. agriculture.
Joe Parsons with the National Agricultural Statistics Service says one innovation will be helpful to people who want to fill out and submit their questionnaire online.
After they answer a few screening questions, they'll only get the questions after that would relate to them. So if they only have corn and soybeans, they won't be asked about cattle or sheep or goats.
A demo of the new questionnaire is available to try on the website agcensus.usda.gov. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Coming your way next on Agriculture Today, this week's Kansas Soybean Update. We turn it on over now to Greg Akagi. Greg?
Niels Bergstein from Holton, who will be a junior at Kansas State, is joining us. And you've had a busy summer, Niels, serving as one of the interns at the Kansas Soybean Commission. What's been your summer like?
My summer's been really exciting. I've got to do a lot of things with the Soybean Commission, part of their advocacy work, and also just learning about the soybean industry as a whole.
Niels, what was your interest in being an intern at the Kansas Soybean Commission?
Well, coming from a farming background, growing up, being part of soybeans was something that really went into what I've always done and what I want to do in the future. Our family farms up in Holton, and being part of the Soybean Commission was going to give me a chance to learn about the industry as a whole and not just what farmers do on a daily basis.
The advocacy movement is very important in this time frame, and what agriculture goes up against.
Farmers work really hard, and there's a lot of information out there that might be inaccurate with agriculture as a whole, and the commission does a great job of trying to push really the truth about agriculture as a whole out for the general public, so people know that the food and know that the crops and know that the work that farmers are doing in the state of Kansas is safe for everyone.
What other parts did you enjoy as far as the internship, being a part of and learning about the industry?
Well, we stayed really busy this summer. One of the highlights this summer was the Atchison and St. Joe area there in mid-July. We had an opportunity to tour several businesses and plants in that area that worked with agriculture. Those plants included grain milling, grain handling, and pesticide, insecticide plants there in the upper northeast region of Kansas.
Is this something you're interested in, the business side of it, through your agribusiness major?
Yeah, this would definitely be something that I could see myself working in the future. Being an agribusiness major, I learn about more the technical knowledge behind it, but this summer's really showed me more of what's behind farming. You see the business side, but also what people do on a daily basis behind the scenes.
It's always good to learn new things about that, and maybe stuff you can use back at the family farm, too.
You bet. Back at the family farm, I already talk about with my parents about things that other people are seeing other farmers do, and also what maybe the industry sees in the future and how we can implement that to our family farm back at home.
All right, Niels, we appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is Niels Bergstein from Holton, who will be a junior at Kansas State and served as one of the interns at the Kansas Soybean Commission. He's been our guest on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
And Greg Akagi with the update. Many thanks, Greg. We'll be back after you hear this. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This Agriculture Today closes out with our weekly K-State Horticulture segment. And for those of you vegetable gardeners who want to extend the season a little further, there is ample opportunity now to plant a fall vegetable garden. And what are the candidates for producing well into the fall? We'll cover those and other aspects of this project now with Dennis Patton joining us. He's the Johnson County Extension Horticultural Agent for K-State. You and your fellow horticulturists have promoted the idea of fall gardening for years, Dennis, and there's probably still more people out there that could take advantage of this.
You know, that's right. In Kansas, we actually have what I would classify as 3 distinct seasons to grow vegetables. And I think everyone knows about the spring season because, you know, once late March rolls around, everyone's eager to get out and start planting. And then May rolls around and we get our tomatoes and peppers in the ground. But a lot of people forget about the fall season. And actually, the fall growing season is dependably longer and more seasonable than our spring period. So most crops we grow in the spring actually do better in a fall crop in Kansas.
You say more seasonable. In other words, the conditions are less temperamental? Is that what you're saying? Or?
You know, temperamental, that is a great word to describe the Kansas weather patterns every year. You know, I think abnormal is the new normal in Kansas when it comes to weather. But as our springs, our Mays Aprils can be very hot, so we can sometimes have a very short growing season for those cooler weather crops. But as we move into September, October, even early November in some parts of the states, we have more weeks of cooler seasonable weather for those crops that develop, which gives you richer flavor and more productivity. And the other good news is weeds and insects are not as much of a problem in the fall months, too.
Mm-hmm. So right to it, those vegetables which can fare quite well in the fall, and as you say, the cooler-loving crops are excellent possibilities here. You might tick through those.
Okay, first would be what I call the cold crops, the broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage. Normally I like to get those in the ground maybe a little bit in earlier to mid-August, and a transplant's the best way to go. This time in the season, you would definitely want to go a transplant. Mm-hmm. But then all what I would call the salad bowl crops, so the lettuce, the spinach, the radish, the carrots, the beets, anything along those lines would be great fall crops because we could actually harvest those well into probably Thanksgiving in most parts of the state, barring one of those, Arctic fronts moving through early and putting an end to our fall season.
Outside of those cold crops, though, you're saying that your salad crops could be planted from seed even this late?
That's correct. They could even direct seeded. Radishes, 30 days from seeding. A lot of lettuce crops, you're looking maybe 45 days or so. So, let's just call it September 1, and you'd be harvesting, mid-October, and then you'd be into October, mid-October into November with those crops, and carrots, beets, those type of things, a bit longer season. So you're looking maybe at some nice Thanksgiving harvest for those type of crops.
Broadly speaking, then, Dennis, the establishment of whatever crop one chooses to plant for fall production, are there special considerations here beyond what we would think about with a spring planting?
We know growing a garden needs the same thing in the spring, summer, or fall, so we need the moisture and the sunlight. One of the problems sometimes with the fall crop is with our excessive heat and our dry soil conditions. Now, in many parts of the state this year, we're having above average rainfall, cooler conditions. But once you direct seed those plants or put a transplant in the ground, probably the biggest challenge is keeping that upper surface of the soil moist so those seeds can germinate and establish. And then, of course, once we start cooling down in September, we hopefully don't have as many hot, windy days that the soil doesn't dry out. So once you get them established, we cool down, get some rainfall. Usually it's pretty easy, typical gardening.
And folks need to remember that our fall seasons are typically now a drier season for us, so managing that moisture, maybe even to the point of employing a mulch.
That is a good point, Eric. The last few years, our Septembers in Kansas and even October has been fairly dry, so moisture is an issue. One trick to help maybe with that moisture is maybe plant these seeds a little bit deeper in the soil, so you get them down to a little bit more buffered moisture level, and also from that fluctuating drying. And then even putting a light mulch, a straw or something over the top of those seeds, just enough to kind of shade that soil a little bit, but still allow them, the lettuce and things to pop through, would be another good way to help conserve a little bit of moisture.
How about nutrient management, starter fertilizer for these fall-planted crops? Is that in order?
Sometimes we've got enough nutrient left over from our spring and summer crops. We don't need to add any. But if you've been in areas like in Johnson County where we've gotten buckets and buckets of rain here in August, it may not hurt to go ahead and do the typical little 1 pound of nitrogen before you plant the fall crops, or just sprinkle a little bit down the planting row and work in the soil. Because especially a lot of these salad crops are very leafy and green, so it does take more nutrient to produce a nice bumper crop.
But don't go overboard with that is what you're saying. You don't want to burn the crop right out the chute.
Yeah, if we do get hot and dry, you could burn the crop getting too much nitrogen in there. But, one of my experiences doing soil tests for a number of years with Extension is that I think a lot of gardeners tend not to fertilize their vegetables enough because they have this fear of over-fertilizing and burning their crops or getting all foliage and no fruit, like in the case of tomatoes. But what I think I've noticed is people tend to under-fertilize in many cases, and then they just don't get enough leafy growth to get really good harvest.
Dennis, there's so much more to this project that's covered in the Kansas Garden Guide from K-State, among other sources out of the university. But once more, folks shouldn't ignore the opportunity here to produce very good, cool-loving crops within these next few weeks.
It's great. You've probably got on some of those seeded crops even up to early September to get them in the ground. So get out, use up some of your leftover seed from spring, find some seed on the market, and enjoy, fresh lettuce, spinach from your garden this fall. How wonderful to have to go along with the Thanksgiving meal, some fresh carrots to go with it too.
But don't tarry too long, for several of these, especially those cole crops, need to be in the ground right away. Dennis, we appreciate the input.
Thanks for calling, and enjoy this fall season coming up.
Dennis Patton, along with us. He is the Johnson County Extension horticultural agent for K-State, and with those basic guidelines on establishing a fall vegetable garden on this week's K-State Horticulture segment. That rounds out this Thursday edition. Thanks for tuning in, and please be back with us here this same time tomorrow, won't you? Meantime, Eric Atkinson here, bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.